You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 202. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Have you ever noticed that the more you try to create certainty in your life, in your practice, the more you try to control all of the external factors so that you can get exactly the result that you want, the more that you try to do this, the less certain you actually end up feeling? If this is something that you can relate to, you are 100% not alone and you're in the right place. So thank you so much for joining me for this podcast episode where we are going to dive into the topic of the paradox of chasing certainty. And the paradox, of course, is that the more you chase certainty, the more you push it away, right? The less certain you actually end up feeling. So today we are going to talk about certainty and how it shows up in the work that I do with my coaching clients. I'm also going to offer you some practical suggestions on how you can create more certainty in your practice and in your life without actually having to control everything. So if that's something that you want to hear more about, stay tuned. We're diving right in. Now, certainty is one of those things that I deal with on a regular basis, but I almost never, in fact, I don't think I ever have had a client come to me and say, what I want is certainty, right? I hear it described in other ways. I want to make a decision and feel confident about it. Or you might be pushing off a decision. One area where I see this often is where a lawyer is stuck in a job they don't like. And it usually sounds something like this. I have been in a role for a certain number of years, and I'm familiar with the role. I'm established in the role, but I'm not really happy. And I want to leave. I'm pretty sure I want to leave, right? There's some uncertainty there. But when I think about what could happen if I leave, I worry that the job I step into will actually be worse than the job I'm in right now. And so what happens there is that instead of making a decision to leave, uncertainty rules the show. And while you are trying to avoid a situation of uncertainty, right? Stepping into a job that may be worse than your current one, what you end up creating is more uncertainty in your current job because you are in this state of limbo, going back and forth between wanting to be where you are, not wanting to be where you are. So you're not 100% committed to staying, but you're not 100% committed to leaving either. And so you're creating an avalanche in a sense of uncertainty, right? You continue to live out that uncertainty, even though the thing that you're trying to avoid is uncertainty. You're trying to create certainty, but you're creating uncertainty instead. Another example where this comes up fairly frequently is in conversations with other people. Now, this could be a conversation with somebody who has authority over you in the sense that they are an employer and maybe you're unhappy and you want to have a conversation with them, but you're concerned that if you have that conversation, the relationship was sour and maybe you'll lose your job, maybe you'll be treated less well, maybe you won't be given the opportunities that you want. You have some concerns over the potential outcome of that conversation. I also see it often, especially with the leaders that I work with, in conversations with members of your team. So the people who report to you, the people for whom you are responsible. And the way this looks there is that you have somebody who's underperforming. You have needs that are not being met. You want that to change. So you are in this state of discomfort. You're in this state of uncertainty because you don't know if this person is capable of changing, and you don't know if there is a better option because you don't really want to take the risk of what could happen if, number one, you have that conversation, right? What if you say something to that person and instead of performing better, they perform worse? What if you have that conversation and they leave? And what if they leave and then you're really in trouble because you have nobody to help you? Or what if you do let them go and you bring somebody else onto the team and that person is worse? So again, you can see how there's this desire for certainty. You want the outcome to be predictable, but that craving, that desire for that certainty is actually preventing you from taking concrete steps, which means that you're now creating more uncertainty. So these are a couple of examples of how uncertainty and that desire for creating certainty, right? That chasing certainty can actually lead to uncertainty. And what I'm excited to talk about today is some ways of figuring out how to create certainty so that you can move ahead with those types of decisions. So before I dive into the practical solutions, the strategies that I have to offer, I just wanted to take a big step back and put this notion of security, of certainty into context. And as humans, we are wired to crave certainty. We are wired to want things to be predictable. If you think about the way that the world is structured, we have calendars and we have clocks because we want certainty over what day something is going to happen, what time you're supposed to show up. As lawyers, as you will appreciate, you operate in the world of laws and rules and regulations and precedent. There are structures in place because that creates certainty, right? If your client does X, they are on side of the law. They are certain that they are going to be okay. Versus if they do something that is offside, then there are consequences that will follow from that action. So we want to have that certainty. And COVID was such a great example of a collective state of uncertainty. Everybody at the same time felt uncertain about the future because we were in this unprecedented phase of life where there were lockdowns, there was illness, schools closed down, workplaces closed down, everything felt uncertain. And we saw how that created ripple effects within our families, within our societies, our communities, in terms of being uncertain. And so this idea that certainty is something that we innately desire, that is just part of the human makeup. And so we want to accept that about ourselves, right? That we do want a certain level of certainty. And some of us want more certainty than others. Now, when it comes to lawyers, here's my theory is I think that for lawyers, that desire for certainty can be even greater than perhaps it is for the general population. And hear me out here. If you think about law itself, as we've just alluded to, law is a set of structures that create certainty and predictability for our societies. And so the fact that you are drawn to law as a profession probably means that there's some element of you that likes that sense of certainty. There's a comfort in knowing that there are structures in place that provide predictability and certainty. Now, if you add to that the idea that law has certain structures in place that are also aligned with certainty. So, for example, the fact that you go to school, law is a degree, and when you come out at the end, you have a license to practice law. When I was deciding way back when I was deciding between law school and grad school, I was accepted to this grad school in Geneva, Switzerland. It was this program for international students to learn about international relations and economics and politics. And I was really intrigued by the idea of going. And I was also accepted into law school here in Canada. And I remember having this discussion with my mother about what I should do next. And, the voice inside my head, I can still hear it, was, well, Paula, a law degree provides you with a marketable skill. You will always have a job. Whereas this graduate degree didn't really result in a certain outcome, right? It didn't give me a license to have a certain role. And so the process itself, even of going to law school, means that you're going to go through a program. And at the end of the program, you will have a law degree and a marketable skill that you can go and use to create a living, to create certainty in your life. Now, when you get to law school, there is also certainty. There's certainty in the idea that if you take a certain number of courses and you pass all of those courses, that you are going to end up on the other side with that degree. And the process of school itself is fairly predictable. And if you've reached that level, and for many of you, law school will be a distant memory. For some of you, you are in law school. And so this is very real to you right now, but there's a predictability there. And so that certainty that if you work hard and you read the cases and you learn how your instructors like you to respond and you figure out the system that you can actually play the game and create a relatively certain outcome. Then, if you follow the rules and you go through the right programs, you'll get a job after law school. If you're in Canada, you'll start articling elsewhere. You may article or you may go straight into an associate position. But here's the deal. You go to school, you get the job, and then you have that certainty of a career. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, is that once you cross that threshold, and I would say there is a certain amount of uncertainty in law school. Will you get the grades? Will you get the job, etc.? So it's not like a super smooth sail where everything is predictable and you know the outcome in advance. But compared to practice, I would say it is relatively certain, because once you cross that threshold from being a student to being a practicing lawyer, things change quite a bit. And this is where I see a lot of uncertainty, right? Those early years of practice in particular are very uncertain. You're doing things for the very first time, and there's that feeling of uncertainty. Are you doing it right? Are you going to get the outcome that you want? What you might find is that as a lawyer, you are often operating in the zones of uncertainty. So when clients come to you, especially if you're working in an environment where you're doing that cutting edge law, people rarely come to you where the answer is easy. There's a black and white decision to be made, and it's very clear where you fall. Most often, when you are asked to look into an issue, when you're asked to do that research or where you're asked to give an opinion, it's not in a case where it's really clear cut. Usually you're in that gray area where it's debatable. It could go either way. And so you are being asked to create certainty. Can you please tell me what the answer is, even though the material that you're working with is gray? The law might be gray, the facts might be gray, and so there's inherent uncertainty in the work that you're doing. Now, there's more uncertainty. If you're a litigator and you're taking something to court, you've got a judge. There's a human with a human brain who is deciding yes or no as to whether or not to give you the thing that you need. So you can do all the prep work, but at the end of the day, the decision is out of your hands. Again, we see there's that uncertainty. You might also find that as a lawyer, yes, you operate in an environment where the rules are fairly stable, but they also change. So you might find that you're trying to keep up with changes in the rules, and that again creates uncertainty. And finally, the last example that I'll give here, because you can probably think of a number of your own examples. You're practicing right now. You can think of all the areas where there's uncertainty in your practice. Finally, where I would offer a bit more uncertainty is with opposing counsel. If you have files where somebody on the other side is, you kind of get that feeling like they're out to get you, or they're trying to find your mistakes, or you know that they're really scrutinizing your work, and that can also create this sense of uncertainty. Like, how are they going to respond? What are they going to uncover? What are they going to say when you submit your mediation brief or your notice of civil claim or whatever it is that you are submitting to them? What are they going to come back with? Again, uncertainty. So you can see how there's all this uncertainty that is generated in the practice. Your clients, they might give you the story of what it is that they're experiencing, and then they leave out some really important facts. And so there you are explaining your case to a judge, and someone all of a sudden comes up and says, but what about this? Or what about that? And you had no idea. So again, we go from this environment back to where we started. You're a lawyer because maybe you were attracted to the predictability and certainty of the law, of going to school and being a good student and getting the result, getting the job. And then you find yourself in this job, and all of a sudden you're treading in these uncertain waters. And yet everybody around you, your clients want certainty, your colleagues want certainty, you want certainty. And yet where is this certainty? So you try to create the certainty by working as hard as you possibly can, by trying to control all of the circumstances that you possibly can in order to create that certain result. And what happens there is, number one, you get completely exhausted. And number two, you're so fixated on certainty that you're pushing that certainty away, right? You're not creating that feeling of certainty. If anything, you're creating less of that feeling of certainty. You're feeling less control. You're feeling less certain. You're feeling more doubt about the outcome and potentially more doubt about yourself. So what do we do in this environment where what we're really craving is certainty and we don't feel that sense of certainty? What can you do? So I'm going to give you 4 areas of focus. The answer, of course, and maybe you're already seeing where I'm going with this, is that if we try to create certainty by trying to control all of the factors and influences that exist outside of us, we're never, ever going to be able to create that certainty. If you ask yourself how much control you have over a judge, you don't. That person has their own mind, they have their own viewpoint. You cannot control them. If you think about the law, you cannot control the law. It is what it is. But what you can control is you. And I know you've heard this before, so I'm not offering you something that you probably don't already know. But what I am offering is a way to look at this question, look at the question of controlling what is within your control and breaking it down into a way that is digestible so that you're not sitting there thinking, well, okay, yes, I need to control me, but where do I even begin? Let's take the guesswork out of that. And I'm going to give you some areas where you can focus, where you can exercise control so that you have that sense of certainty and you become more able, more skilled at generating that certainty within yourself so that you're less dependent on creating that certainty by controlling the factors outside of you. So there are 4 areas where I'm going to encourage you to focus in order to create that certainty. We're going to go through those now. And as we go through the examples, I encourage you to think about you and how they relate to you and your practice and how you can use these techniques to create more certainty for yourself. So the first area when it comes to creating that sense of certainty is to create certainty with the way that you think. Now, here's something that I've noticed when it comes to the way that people think generally and lawyers think, and in particular, when I'm working with lawyers, some of the ways that they describe their challenges. And often what I've noticed is that when you are describing a problem, the problem begins with what you don't want. And so the focus starts with, well, here are the things that aren't working. And the trouble is that the more we focus on the things that aren't working, the less we're focused on creating the things that will work. Michael Singer is the author of The Untethered Soul. It is a fabulous book. And in the book, he talks about obstacles and how in life, sometimes what we do is we try to avoid an obstacle by building our life around avoiding it. So the analogy that he uses is, let's say you have a thorn and that thorn is lodged in your arm and it's pinching on a nerve. And so what you end up doing is trying to build your life around protecting your arm. So when you sleep, maybe you've got some bubble wrap around your arm so that if you roll over, you don't hurt yourself. And when you go out into public, maybe you've got a special suit that you wear. You avoid going through the forest where you might bump your arm up against the trees. Maybe you avoid relationships with people because if they hug you, then they're going to press on your arm and it's going to hurt. So you end up designing this entire life that is structured around avoiding a certain problem. So if you bring that back to this idea of certainty, then you might be building your entire life around trying to create certainty or avoid uncertainty to the point that your life is not a reflection of what you want, but a reflection of what you do not want. So you can see how, for example, if you're in that position where you want to leave your job, but you don't want to leave it because you don't want to step into something that could potentially be worse, instead of going out and looking for the thing that's going to be the right job for you, you stay stuck and you stay in that state of uncertainty, right? You've got that bubble wrap on because you're trying to avoid the uncertainty. So what Michael Singer does in his book is he talks about how you can build up your protection around it and build your life to accommodate this obstacle, or you can remove the thorn. And so where we're going today is I'm trying to help you remove the thorn. So part of that means when you are thinking, it's a little bit meta here, but when you're thinking then about what it is that is uncertain or what it is that you are trying to avoid, we want to flip that around and start thinking about what it is that you actually want. And what you might find is that it's a lot easier to identify the things that you don't want, right? If you're sitting there and you are in pain, you're having a relationship at work with somebody who is your team member, they are there to help you, but every time you ask them to do something, it comes back with typos or it's wrong or they don't do it or they keep coming back to you and asking you questions and you want them to answer those questions for themselves, right? So you're sitting there, you are in pain and you're just thinking, I don't want this. I don't want this role. I don't want this person to be supporting me. And yet you haven't necessarily asked yourself what it is that you do want. And this is harder to do. And what I would encourage you to do is to do that mental exercise of creating in your mind's eye the thing that you do want. There is an exercise I do with some of my coaching clients, which is all about creating a vision. And I've created this worksheet. I call it the Creating a Vision worksheet. And I've given it to a number of my coaching clients. And it's so interesting to me because some lawyers will complete that vision worksheet and they seem to really get behind it relatively easily. And others will really struggle with it. And so I always give a warning. If I send that worksheet, if you ever work with me and I send you that worksheet, I will give you the warning that it's hard to do. Like, it can be really hard to do. And the reason why I think it's hard to do is because we don't necessarily have the vision, right? That's why they're here with me. They're trying to figure out what that vision is. And so if you are struggling to identify what it is that you want, we need to figure out how we can get you from not being able to have a clear vision to having a clear vision. Because as long as you're in that murky place where you don't really see it, where you don't really know what you want, you will continue to create uncertainty because you lack certainty of the outcome that you are seeking. So if you are in that position, what I would encourage you to think about is how you can go from where you are to creating a vision, something that is a clear picture of what you want. And if you can't see it, if you can't see the end goal, start to see the little bits and pieces that you can see. So the analogy that comes to mind for me is when you're watching a screen. And sometimes the screen, I see it on my Zoom sometimes. I'll be watching my Zoom and for whatever reason, the internet dips. And instead of seeing a clear image, I'll see a very grainy image, right? It's like the image shows up as little tiny squares that are all stuck together instead of a clear image with clean lines. So the same is true for you. If you can't see the whole picture, just try to identify some of the little bits and pieces that would make up the overall vision. So for example, if you are in a job and one of the issues is that your target is too high or the culture is off or you don't like your practice area or there's some piece of it that you can easily identify isn't working, what would work? Ask yourself what would work. And what you want to do here, so this is step one, is you want to think. You want to think in a way that creates more certainty. We want to move away from focusing on the things that you don't want. We're just going to put that to the side and we're going to discipline ourselves to think about the things that we do want to create. So we're now focused on what do you want to build? And we're going to start small. And even if we are not able to see the full picture right away, we're going to channel our attention to the pieces of the picture that we can identify. So that leads us to step two, which is actions. So when it comes to then taking action, and again, we're looking at this situation where maybe you're not taking action because of the uncertainty. You're avoiding the conversation, you're avoiding changing jobs. So what do you do there? And the answer to this is to take a step back and think about different types of goals. And there are two types of goals that we can talk about today. One of them is an outcome goal and one of them is a process goal. Now, an outcome goal is where you look at the end result that you're seeking and you go straight for that goal. An example that might resonate is a billable target, right? If you've got a billable target of 1,800 hours in a year, your outcome goal is 1,800 hours. Now, the process goal is the process along the way that you will follow in order to reach your goal. So for a target of 1,800 hours, well, you might think about breaking it down. Maybe that's, 7.5 hours every day that you're in the office. I don't know if that math is right. I'm just giving it as an example. It may be generating work. If you need additional workflow in order to meet your target, it might be, okay, I'm going to go and develop relationships with these lawyers in my firm. I'll develop some referral sources outside of my firm. I'll do presentations to potential clients so that I can bring in some new work. You'll think of process, steps, things that you can do in order to reach that ultimate outcome goal, right? The 1,800 hours. So if you are sitting there in a state of uncertainty and maybe the outcome is you want to change your job or you want to replace the person on your team with somebody new, or maybe you want that person to perform at a level where you can keep them. You want that. So you want to think about the outcome. But what I encourage you to do here is if you're in a state of uncertainty, get really granular about the process. Look at what are the actions that you can take that are going to lead you in the direction of that ultimate outcome goal. So the more you can break down the process, the easier it's going to be for you to start taking steps. And what we're doing here now is we are aligning your actions because we're going to implement on that. The actions that you take are going to follow the process goal. So whatever process you set up for yourself, break it down into small pieces, and then you want to take actions in alignment with the goal. And what that will start to do is that you'll start to nudge forward inch by inch. You will start to take action. So you'll be aligning the way that you act toward that goal, right? You're going to start to see how you're aligned with that outcome that you want to be certain. And you're going to start generating evidence of you accomplishing steps toward that goal. And the more that you're able to step by step build those pieces up, the more you're going to start creating momentum and you're going to start creating certainty. It's like little building blocks of certainty. And that will start to generate more of the feeling of certainty that you are looking for. Which brings us to the third step, which is to create a feeling of certainty. Now, ultimately, certainty is a feeling, right? If you were to identify it, right, it's do you feel certain about the outcome? Now, here is where I think it can be really challenging for lawyers. And I say this based on my own experience as a lawyer. And I've talked about it on the podcast before. I have struggled in the past very much with the idea of feelings and the role that they play, particularly professionally as a lawyer. And when I was in law school, I mean, I don't know that I've ever been super in touch with my feelings. I think now I'm a lot more in touch with them. But I remember in law school making a pact with one of my law school classmates that we just wouldn't deal with feelings, right? We had this mantra, suppress and deny, right? We were there, school was stressful, things were happening. And instead of kind of wasting time wallowing in feelings, we were focused. We were focused on doing what we needed to do to take exams, get through the day, whatever it was. And that mantra, even though we were kind of joking about it, kind of stuck. And for many years as a student and then as a lawyer, I really divorced myself from feelings, right? It was very much, here I am, I'm a lawyer, this is serious work, and I'm interested in the facts, I'm interested in logic. I did not want to get involved with feelings, anybody's feelings, my client's feelings, my feelings. Feelings just weren't part of the equation. And if you can relate to that, then you're not alone. And in some ways, maybe it's a protective mechanism, maybe it's a strategy, but what happened for me is that one day I woke up and realized, well, wait a second, I don't really know how I feel about any of this. And then it marked the beginning of a much different chapter where I'm way more interested in feelings. I'm way more interested in emotions. And I'm way more aware of the huge role that feelings actually play in terms of your motivation, in terms of what you're willing to do, in terms of your ability and capacity to do your work, in terms of the meaning that you give the work that you do, in terms of your values, in terms of all of it. And so feelings really do matter. And creating a feeling of certainty is something that you can generate when you generate that feeling within yourself. And so this might be relatively new to you. It might be something that you're not entirely comfortable with. But here, when it comes to creating that sense of certainty, I encourage you to find ways to create a feeling of certainty within yourself. Do it without having the need for the outside world to conform to what you want from it. It's creating that sense of certainty as a feeling in your body. So you might ask yourself the last time you felt really certain about something. Maybe it was really certain that maybe it was work related. Maybe it was certain that you nailed it with a client. You did exactly what they needed and you did it really well. You were going in for a court application. You knew exactly what you needed to do and you executed on that. You were stitching a contract together and you were certain that this was exactly what the client needed. So think about what certainty feels like for you. And if I think about certainty and what it feels like for me, it is a feeling in my chest. It is a tone of voice that I use. It is an energy. It is a feeling of I am doing this. It's almost like there's a feeling of forward momentum that is pulling me forward because of that feeling of certainty. So for you, I want you to ask yourself, what does certainty feel like? And if you were just to generate that feeling, what does it feel like? And you want to practice that. And maybe you're thinking, Paula, this sounds crazy. You're asking me to do this weird thing and I don't want to do it, but please give it a try. Experiment with me. It might help to think of an analogy. If you've ever been around somebody who is laughing, and I did this the other day, I was on a Zoom call and we were doing an experiment. It was very fun. And so I was laughing on my Zoom screen. There were two other people who were in a Zoom room with me and I was fake laughing, trying to act out a past event where I was laughing. And it was so funny is that, well, I was fake laughing. I started to real laugh and the two people on the Zoom screen also started to laugh along with me, right? It's like that feeling was contagious. And so if you think about your sense of certainty, if you're able to kind of even fake that sense of certainty, you'll notice how it generates that sense of certainty in your body. And for the people around you, you might notice, let's say it's in an environment where you're with other people, that they might also energetically sense your sense of certainty and themselves feel more certain as well. So ways to generate that certainty, think about how it feels and try to create that. It might also help to have a mantra. So mantras that work for me, I think telling yourself something like, it's as good as done. I've done it before. I will do it again. I've got this. All of this will create a certain sense of certainty. And what you're doing here, if you are intentionally creating that sense of certainty, you're crowding out something else. You're crowding out feelings of doubt. You're crowding out feelings of uncertainty. And so you can see how when you intentionally step into that, you start to build momentum. So far we've talked about your thinking. We want you to channel your thoughts in terms of what it is that you want to create. We don't want to be working in this sort of opposite vacuum, right? We're trying to not do something. We are actually here trying to create a very specific outcome, right? A specific result, a vision that you create. If it's not fully in picture, we're going to focus on the pieces where we do have a clear image. And that's where we're channeling our thoughts. We are channeling our actions to align with the thing that we want. So that's creating more certainty step by step. And then we're generating that feeling emotionally of certainty. And that leads us to the fourth practical suggestion, which is taking that be, do, have model and applying it to certainty. So I've talked about this on the podcast before. The be, do, have model is a model I learned in my coach training years ago. And it goes something like this. I think our typical way of approaching the world is I'm going to do the thing to have the results so that I can be a certain way. I'm going to do the work to have my law degree so that I can be a lawyer. And I mean, I suppose the certification, you do follow that pathway. But for something like a feeling, if it's certainty, for example, you might tell yourself, well, in order to have certainty, I need to take the steps to have the outcome that I want and then I can be certain. And what I'm inviting you to do here is to flip all of that around and to be certain so that you do the things that will create what you will have, right? You will have certainty because you will start by being certain. If you try to create certainty or feel certain because you have managed to control all of the unpredictable, uncertain factors that lay outside of your control, you will never be certain. You will never have that feeling. And I was listening to a podcast the other day. I wish I could remember who it was or what it was about, but this came up and it was perfect because it was exactly what I needed to hear at the time. And it was all about how our brains work to filter out information, because if it didn't filter out that information, we would be overwhelmed. And I believe the example that they were giving is that when you are operating day to day, there are risks everywhere. And you know this as lawyers, that there are risks everywhere. And if you allow yourself to focus on every single risk, you will never be able to move forward because you will be consumed by all of those risks. And so your brain, as a favor to you, filters out risk so that you're able to move forward. And this, I think, fits in beautifully here because what I'm encouraging you to think about is, can you be a certain person? Can you be a person who is able to manage uncertain outcomes? And this doesn't mean that you throw all caution to the wind and ignore risks that are plain in front of you. And it doesn't mean you don't do your due diligence to assess risk. You do all of that. But the difference is instead of going at this from a place of feeling a lack of certainty, chasing certainty by doing X, Y, Z, instead, what I would love for you to step into, for you to embody, is to be a person who is certain in yourself, certain in you and your ability to manage whatever surprise comes your way. And what you may have found, I know I have found this anecdotally, when I am planning something and I have identified the main risks and I've prepared for those risks, if something happens that is unpredictable, it's almost never the thing that I thought might happen. I'm ready for that, right? It's not a risk. It is almost always going to be a surprise. And so if you can be a person who is okay in uncertainty, who is comfortable handling uncertainty, then you pretty much step away from this paradox because you're no longer hinging your hat on the need for certainty. You're no longer chasing certainty. And so as a result, you feel more of that sense of certainty. So again, if we bring that back to the example, you're maybe looking at a different role, or you're looking at having that difficult conversation. And instead of saying, well, I can't do it until I'm absolutely certain that everything about that other job would be better, or I'm absolutely certain that person wouldn't leave and that I'd be stuck. If you could instead say, well, I'm certain that no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. I will create the certainty that I need. Then your approach will be so different. And as you reflect on that, think about where you are stalling currently in your practice, in your life, where you're holding off on making a decision because of certainty. And would it be different? What would be different if you were able to say, okay, even accepting a certain amount of uncertainty, I'm okay to go ahead because. So that is what I have to share with you today. This idea of certainty, of chasing certainty versus creating certainty. And I've offered some strategies to help make the exercise of creating that internal sense of certainty, of security, really more tangible. The way that you're thinking, the way that you take action, the goals, that process goal versus the outcome goal, breaking it into steps, creating evidence of certainty that you can then build on. The idea of channeling the feeling of certainty. What does certainty feel like to you? How can you bring more of that into your life generally? And then finally, this idea of being certain, the be, do, have. When you can be certain, then you can have, you'll do the things that will allow you to have that sense of certainty. So I hope that what we've talked about today has resonated with you and that you are feeling, right? That you are feeling more certain. And if there's something that you're struggling with right now, if there's a decision that you want some support making, by all means, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to help support you. And I look forward to reconnecting with you again next week. Take care. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.